Well, welcome back to the My First Rodeo podcast, the show that asks very cool, famous, and interesting people about the various firsts on their paths to success. Today is no exception. We have Tim Cost in the house. Tim Cost is an extraordinary man. He's someone who I've got some commonalities with, and then some things that I have nothing in common with other than admiration of him and his accomplishments. Tim and I both went to Jacksonville University, although we went very different times, or at least slightly different times. He was there in the mid-'80s, and I say that. He was there in the 80s. I didn't get there until 86 to 90, so we were there at slightly different times, but our experiences were similar in that Jacksonville University was the right place at the right time for each of us, and me in a small way and him in a bigger way have invested back into Jacksonville University to make sure that it continues to be that and so much more. He's now the president of Jacksonville University, has been for 10 years, has invested of his and his wife Stephanie's and their entire family's time, talent, and treasure, including to the tune of over $10 million of their own money that they've invested. Well, he's continued to serve as the president and started a law school there and now starting a medical school and so many great programs, invested in sports, but most of all has invested in the students, really investing inwardly focused community to JU and outwardly focused JU to the community in a way that, frankly hasn't been done there or at a lot of institutions. So great story there, but he comes out of corporate America where he succeeded greatly, held positions at the C-suite level, including at the highest possible positions at PepsiCo, at Eastman Kodak, at Bristol Myers Squibb, Aramark, Johnson & Johnson, Pfizer, and ultimately could have continued in that trajectory, could have retired and played golf, could have done so many things, and instead chose to come back to his alma mater, Jacksonville University. And there's so many things we can learn about this guy who grew up in upstate New York in a small family. I say small family, had brothers, but I mean a small community and just a family that was tightly knit. And just a great story of Americana, but also just lessons learned, including, a great model for marriage that ultimately became a model for his marriage because he's been married, I think, 46 years to Stephanie, who they went to high school with. And we'll learn a lot about what makes him tick, about the experiences he had along the way that gave him a heart for service, that gave him a heart for leadership and following, which are really just two sides of the same coin. And he does both of those really well all the time. And ultimately, that led him to have a successful family life and just a peace. And I don't know, he touches so many things in a really meaningful way. I've always admired Tim. I'll say anecdotally that he was someone who I had lunch with, I don't know how many years ago, but it was before I started this podcast. And he always asked, what are you up to? What's your next idea? And he's always very encouraging, even though I'll admit that some of my ideas are stupid. And occasionally there's one that turns out to be good. I think this podcast has turned out to be one that's good. I mentioned it to him that day, and he goes, that's a really neat idea, talking about people's firsts on their path to success. And, now we're 30 plus episodes, and I thought it was time to talk to Tim and have you guys hear more about Tim. What I like about this episode is Tim is a person who I've spoken with many times. I've read his bio many times. I've introduced him at events because I've been on the board of trustees at JU and several other boards and advisory boards over there, and we've intersected in the community. But it's always purposeful. It's always some reason that I'm introducing him or we're having a conversation because of a community initiative or a JU initiative that we're part of. I need something, or perhaps he sees a place where I could be a part of an opportunity for improvement. And I love all those things. They're great. There's nothing wrong with them. But he's someone who deserves to be known better. He's someone who deserves to be celebrated. And, I hope that this interview, this discussion between Tim and I does that. It did it for me. The thing I love the most about this podcast is I get to talk to really cool people, many of whom I already have relationships with, some of whom I don't. And I get to ask the questions I want to ask. I hope they're the ones that you would ask as well. I think you're going to be excited about this. This is me talking to President Tim Cost. Well, Tim Cost, welcome to the My First Rodeo podcast.
Thanks, Mike. What a great idea for a format. Good on you.
Thanks, man. I appreciate it. And you were there at the beginning. You helped encourage me, as you encourage so many, by saying that's not a bad idea. And when Tim Cost says something's not a bad idea, then I feel like it might even be a great idea. So hopefully we'll do it. But it seemed, as I thought about this and thought about you, and we've had plenty of conversations, and I've obviously reviewed your resume. I've given introductions of you before, but they've always been for a reason, right? I mean, so many people, you get introduced probably 3 or 4 times a day, dozens of times a week. You have conversations, and you're such an authentic, genuine person, but you also are purposeful. You're either raising money, raising awareness, doing civic work, introducing somebody else. And gosh, I know I probably only scratched the surface in getting to know you, and I imagine other people that count you as friends, or that just know of you, haven't got to scratch beneath the surface too. So I'm excited to do that. Thanks for the opportunity.
Yeah, thank you. And you've been a great friend to both Jacksonville University and me personally. And when you first floated this idea, it reminded me of a New Yorker cartoon I may have told you, where a young man is saying, he has this stricken look on his face, and he says, "It's only my second rodeo. Everybody expects me to know so much." So we're back to first episodes. Yeah,
absolutely. So let's start at some of your first rodeos, and obviously you don't necessarily know it's a rodeo until afterwards sometimes. So talk about your upbringing. Talk about where the seeds got planted that ultimately become Tim Cost.
Yeah, sure. So born and raised in cold weather, upstate New York, Syracuse. And in those days, it was all sports all the time for me and my siblings, 2 brothers and a sister. Father was a CEO. He was an athlete, wonderful stay-at-home mother. It was kind of Americana, it was Pleasantville, I think. The idea early on struck me that, if you wanted to get out and do things in the world, you're going to have to get out and go. So I think anytime you're in a small town, if you were me, this was, remember now, pre all the technology that's today. So everything when I started to leave central New York, everything was a first, everything. First flight, first train, first everything. And Jacksonville University was the breakthrough. We didn't spend much time in Florida. So to come out of upstate New York, where, it either snowed or was cloudy all the time, to come down and live in what was then a spectacular suburb of Arlington, it was a gift. So that's where it all started.
Yeah, Arlington. For those of you that are outside of Jacksonville, he's talking about Arlington as sort of a suburb, if you will, of Jacksonville. Talk about your parents. Your dad was a CEO of what type of company? Yeah,
he started a company, stainless steel fabrication. So think about construction. So my brothers and I especially grew up on construction sites our whole lives. My mom, as I said, was a stay-at-home. They started dating, when they were 16. They stayed together until my dad died when he was 79. It was very much of that era, the 1960s and 70s suburban America. Pretty homogeneous high school, that sort of thing. You hung out with the same people. And therefore, if you were in that setting, you better get good grades. You better be good at something extracurricular. And in my family, it was sports. And other families, it might have been the arts or music or whatever. And so ultimately, we all went away and played sports in college. Yeah, my brothers, one at James Madison, one at Colgate, and me at Jacksonville. And that enabled us, who were born so close together, to all get a college education in a short period of time, and hopefully not tax our parents too much.
Yeah. Well, obviously, I mean, your dad was doing as well as average or better than average, it sounds like.
Yeah.
So maybe there would have been another path to college, but athletics certainly helps. And I know that's a big part of what you've tried to do and have done at JU. And your mom, stay-at-home mom?
Stay-at-home mom, right. 6 pregnancies in 10 years, for a little 4'9" woman. Two passed away along the way.
I admire her already.
Yeah, exactly. Still with us, age 93. I guess in the world of firsts, the first disciplinarian. Those were the days when, Dad would come home from work and everybody jump on him. We'd go outside and play ball. And then, if there was work to be done, Mom would crack the whip. But that was just how it was. And the upbringing was Italian, Greek, and Irish. Those were the 3, if you look at my 2 parents. And so you had plenty of kind of ethnic inroads on the weekends as to where you're going to spend Sunday, Italian Sunday dinners and Friday night Irish drinking. And it was great upbringing.
And obviously cost from your father's side, where do the costs come from?
Sure. So believe it or not, Kost is a shortened version of a longer Greek name, Konstantinidis, which my dad's dad was Konstantin Panagiotis Konstantinidis from Greece. He married Margaret Kelly from County Mayo, Ireland. And on the other side, my mom is Yolanda Maria Montalto from Italy. So those two got together in high school and it was born.
That's kind of neat. That's really neat. And I mean, I don't know how much of the backstory and the family blending, such as it is, you know about, but how did all the families get along back then? How controversial was it to be blending those ethnicities?
Yeah, I think it was unusual for my mom's family that my mother, who was a little tiny Italian girl, second generation, was going to take up with somebody who wasn't an Italian boy.
Right.
And if you listen to, fortunately, they were all alive when I was little, so they're grandparents, so I could talk to them. On the other side, my Irish grandmother was happy that her 8th child had found somebody he loved. So she wasn't too worried about whether the girl was Italian or Irish or Greek.
Nice, the way parents should be. Now, I mean, all those ethnicities have one thing in common, particularly the Greek and the Italian, maybe a little less the Irish, and that is passion, both the good parts and the louder parts of passion. I don't know anybody more controlled, and you're certainly passionate, but your passion is expressed in a form of leadership and inspiring others in all these sort of more subtle ways. So what was your household like as it relates to those attributes?
Sure. I have to comment on that, Mike. Not too long ago, here at this point in my career, both my children we'll get to that. They've gone through school, they're professional, they're doing very well. They have kids of their own.
Great people. No Melanie well.
Thank you. It was Melanie, my daughter, who's a CEO and founder of her own company, said, Dad, sometimes your passion comes across as rage. Really? And I think so to your point, around my house, people were pretty level. I mean, you could get the explosions mostly around competitions that you were, siblings, wrestling with each other, playing sports, that sort of thing. But I think it was of that era. I mean, you really never saw your parents in the 60s and 70s getting after each other, at least not where I was. So, and I appreciate the comment about being level. For me, kind of one of the first insights I had as an athlete was I was going to try to go the long haul in everything: football, baseball, basketball, tennis, golf, every sport I played. And that a lot of emotion took a lot out of me. Yelling about an umpire's call, jumping on top of people after a great play in football. So I tended to play what probably looked like under control. By the time I got to college sports, that was very helpful because not burning up a lot of your energy when you're pitching against Miami or Florida State in baseball was helpful. But that's a very fair observation. I'm aware of it, and it's helped me stay pretty steady.
Yeah, it's certainly. I mean, I've served on a board of which you were the president of the organization at Jacksonville University. So I've been around you professionally. Obviously, I've never been with you 9 to 5. I'm sure there's a wide range of people that have observed you in different ways. I've only heard the good ones, but I've never heard anyone say, gosh, he's a screamer, he's a yeller, or, even passive aggressive. You just seem to say what you mean and mean what you say. Yeah. Not mean about it.
Yeah. Thanks. My observation there, first time I was a coach of little guys, coached all the sports because my kids played, but especially in baseball. I remember thinking as a player, if a coach were yelling, thinking, I'm not sure why he's screaming at my teammate there. That kid didn't mean to do that.
Right.
And so when I became a coach, it seems so simple today, but when I became a coach, started with little 7 and 8 year olds, went all the way through to my son was a teenager. It didn't matter how difficult the situation was. I mean, we were the adult. You sit down and talk to them kind of in the tone of voice we have here. The kid feels bad enough. So the concept of being uneven, inconsistent, or emotional when you were a coach around young people, it flashed forward. You became a young business executive. You had older people around you mentoring. Then you blinked, and then you were the 40-year-old mentoring. And that has stayed true to this day, Mike. I mean, I'm, at my point in my 60s, having come out of JU in 81, you've got hundreds and hundreds of young employees who work for you. And you've got thousands of 18 to 24-year-old young people in your life. And I think they seem more at ease and more on balance if they know they can rely on you to be generally positive and supportive, the way you and I have tried to be with each other. There should never be a time one of us pulls back from the other saying, boy, he's just going to go after me. So it not only fits me naturally, I also think it's the right thing for the other people.
Well, yeah, and I want to get back to that. It definitely changes the relationship because we've had, I'm sure we've each had circumstances coming up or after we came up where there's people that, for whatever reason, they're your boss, they're your employee, they're your colleague, they serve on a board with you. So you still have to be around them. But it changes what you can accomplish in the relationship if you have to work around. And yet we see people, we don't need to name them in the public fare, that clearly surround themselves with yes people. Clearly you can't speak truth to them if they're the boss. And frankly, nowadays they could be the employee and you can't speak truth to them. You have to manage, manipulate, or woo them somehow. I mean, that's not been your experience, at least in the times you've been in leadership. How do you manage that?
Yeah, that's a very accurate paragraph, though. I agree with every word of that. I've seen, I was at 6 great corporations in the world, biggest corporations in their fields in history, and sit on lots of boards. I'm fortunate to be asked to do things. Now the university,
the Federal Reserve,
chair the Atlanta Federal Reserve Bank, and other things. Yep, but the thought. Early on, I had a senior executive, very high-ranking person, and I was a very low-ranking person, and came and saw me in my office, but way back at Kodak, when Kodak was the world's most admired company. Mm-hmm. And he said, "Hey, I wonder if you give me a little coaching on something." And then he started talking, and the word coaching stuck in my head, and it changed the relation. He didn't say, "I want your opinion." He didn't say, "Hey, I've got a question for you." So he sort of ceded off. He was kind of humbling himself a little. So anyway, a couple of years later, I gave him my opinion. I was like 23 and he was 55 and he could do whatever he wanted with my advice. And I asked him about it. And he said it happened to him years before, that a high-ranking person had used the word, today we'd say, coach me up on this, Mike. I mean, how does stand-up comedy really work? That sort of thing. I'm giving to you the place of expertise. Right. So, and the other one I learned along those lines, and I've used it a number of times. If you get sideways with people, if they disagree with what you're doing, they don't like they're being treated for whatever reason you just referenced is accurate. I have found if you ask them to do you a favor, not if you offered to do them a favor. Mm-hmm. This was actually Benjamin Franklin, that it forces the other person to sort of try to think positive. They may decide to say, no, screw you. Right. Or if you and I have had an argument, something's wrong, we've had a falling out, and I reach out to you and say, hey, Mike, I could really use a little coaching here. Would you mind giving me your thoughts on da-da-da? First of all, going into that interaction, you were unhappy with me. Yeah. I was probably unhappy with you. It's not a parlor trick. It's a real human emotion.
Diffuses things.
It does diffuse things, and it causes people to think different. And I've had the pleasure, 32 years in business and, 47 years with this incredible woman I'm with. And a lot of that stuff, people think, well, did you take psychology at JU? I mean, we all took something like that at JU. If you want to be interesting, be interested in other people. Yeah. If you want to be involved in things, you have to offer to serve. That, I mean, a lot of those things which sound like trite punchlines today to young people, that's reality to me.
Yeah, no, and you walk that walk and talk it less, and I appreciate that. Forming this question as we're talking, and maybe it's one I actually want you to coach me up on. It seems to me there's an inherent tension or a fine line between the types of strategies. I hate to use those words because it does start to connote parlor tricks or that there's something ungenuine about it. But I guess that's the question. How do you walk that fine line between that and appearing to be feeling like worried that the other person will perceive you as manipulative? Or I don't know if that's the right word.
I think you're pretty close to my experience. The way I always used to look at that, it's sort of like if you hear someone giving a speech and they never stumble. There's no there's no if it begins to feel rehearsed to you, you might say this is pretty slick, even though if I read this is really well done. The actual delivery of it is throwing me off. They may just be a really good speaker.
Yeah, too good. Yeah,
exactly. And I've learned because I was trained to do a lot of that, and you and I both have to do a lot of that in their life now, people do feel better if you pause and think for a minute. But with what you're talking about,
particularly in managing people, in that sense, sometimes I'm the worst, I think, at delivering bad news or constructive feedback, because I don't know, I like to be liked. And so I find that to be a challenge. Maybe some of our listeners do as well, to deliver. There's people that are yellers and screamers and tell people what's unacceptable. That's a strategy. And then there's people that want to communicate in a way that empowers but doesn't overly frustrate. And I don't know that I've succeeded in that. That's always been my guiding point, but I feel like it's so hard to know how the other person's perceiving it.
Yeah. Some of the words that people wrap around themselves will throw people out. If I tell you, can I be honest for a minute? Mm-hmm. What were we, by the way, a minute ago?
Yeah,
okay.
Right.
How about, I want to be totally transparent.
Right.
Okay. Or, my authentic self. I mean, there's a whole range of these things that have become little, to me, tripwires. I find there are, when you get into the difficult where you were going with, not appearing to be manipulative, and people don't like to do this part, but it has worked for me and it's pretty natural, is you just kind of open yourself up. I mean, I've had to fire a lot of people over time. Many of these people have stayed my friends. They still come to my house. My wife marvels at, you get Christmas presents from people who you canned 20 years ago, but it's, this idea of respect and self-respect it starts with, and then treating them with respect. And I often will open up and say, look, this is a hard call for me. I've struggled with this. I think you're a terrific person. You're not a good fit for what's going on. That's if you're in that one situation. I'm not smart enough to remember 15 lies times 7 people times 52 weeks times 32. I mean, it's better for me if I say, this is kind of what happened here, and what people in the main these days don't like, I think maybe because they learn to write on their phones, is an actual honest to God comment about the reality of something, and then withstand the volley, and then you live through it. And I think the higher you go, I've been fortunate to be relatively high at some pretty good organizations, the better people are at that. They are more direct. They are more honest. People think they're mean or they're nasty or they're cold. They're not. I would rather, if you were unhappy with me about something at this point in our friendship, I'd rather you just said it. And I said, Jesus, Mike, that was not my intent. I didn't skip you for that. I thought, so as opposed to me hearing about it 7 years later while you kept score over the years. Yeah.
And that happens. I mean, as many people as you touch in a year, in a career, in a lifetime, there's going to be those miscommunications. It's sort of getting back to how you became, the leader that you are. And that's certainly one of the things I think of when I think of you. I'm sure people do. Whether it was at home, because it sounds like you had a solid upbringing, whether it was in sports, which was part of what you did early on and often and got you in and through college, or your early jobs, your first jobs, what brought out the best in you? What type of leadership style did you respect? You gave an example of one where someone higher up asked to be coached. What are some of the other things that you found to be positive leadership styles and negative leadership styles when you were, in the front end?
Yeah, a good look at it. The very early days, back in the day, sports teams would choose captains, and usually they just pick the best player.
Right.
And I can't say I was always the best player, but
as a lot of businesses do, by the way, like law firms, accounting firms, medical practices, like, hey, who's the best? Whatever. They could be a horrible manager.
Could be a horrible manager.
But a great lawyer.
Yep, exactly. So early on, and my dad, back to your earlier question about my father, was a tremendous. He loved to talk about this stuff deep into the night over cigars and martinis, and this concept of how does one lead? In other words, there's no leadership without followership. You're not a great leader because you got a title and a lot of money. It's that people go in a place they couldn't go without you. And so early on, I mean, I can remember as early as 10 years old being captains of little sports teams, where you're wearing uniforms and people are watching and thinking this is pretty cool. I mean, they're listening to what you're saying, and having drummed into me, and it wore through to my corporate career that, give the credit away. If you really are a reasonably good player or a good business executive, the last thing you have to do is walk around and tell people, did you see the game I just pitched or the touchdown I just scored? And so it seemed that really legitimate humility, if you kept it in your mind, and service to others. These are not, Hallmark card lines, had real value in leading better if you thought you. And so over and over and over in the early days as an athlete. And then very early, I caught a couple of huge breaks in the early days at Kodak when I was in my 20s, right out of JU, where they were creating small teams. The closest thing I could call it is back maybe when you were in high school and they'd create a little study group and you knew one person would always do the work. Usually the smartest girl. That's what I remember in my public high school. But there were these small teams sort of rising executives, and it just felt like everybody had kind of was pulling back a little. And I can remember thinking this dang JU education is working. I mean, we were taught by Fran Kinney, step in, lead, get involved. And I had people around me because it was a great company. I remember that many of them were at our wedding, Princeton, Harvard, Stanford, Cornell, but they seemed sort of wanted to drift along a little bit. And I said, let's try this. Can you do that? And Jesus, it worked. And so early on, so I'm talking about in my 20s, now I'm in my 60s, and I have remembered that if I can catch you doing what you like to do, it's better that I catch you doing what you like to do than telling you what you don't do well and you work on that. And that you actually create this tapestry of as few as 3, and I try to never get much beyond 6 people together on something important. And the only part they're working on is what they're really good at and what they like. So if I got a finance person, I'm not asking them to give a speech. If I got a writer, I'm not asking them to look at the income statement. If I got a great lawyer like you, and so you get them all and then you weave them together. That ends up looking like you're a good leader. At least you put them all in the right position to succeed. Yeah,
that's a great model. And it sounds like that's what worked for you as well, in terms of, I know you're strong in a lot of areas, but you were in so many high-level leadership positions in so many companies. I don't personally know anybody who's been in as many and succeeded at all of them. It's not like you were jumping from one to the next. Completely different industries. Now you approach with all the best parts of business mind, running a university. And that has to be an ability to discern people's talents and absence thereof, and then motivate them and sort of get them in the right place, just like a good coach does, right? Yeah. A lot of it becomes, I try not to get into people's personal lives. Like I can tell you there are spectacular talents who work directly for me for 12 years, and I couldn't tell you what kind of car they drive. I couldn't tell you their favorite food. They've got families. They should go home. I'm not trying to grab them on the weekend, but I'm frequently checking in with them during the day. And I do think this is getting lost as we all work more virtually and we all work more with devices in our hands. I learned a part of the leadership is, quote, walking around. You check in on a dean of students or an athletic director or a chief financial officer or provost. Just say, how you doing? I mean, how'd you get through the hurricane? Everything okay? Is your mom, is she, that 2 minutes, they used to say that the data would say if you watch a presidential debate and the key to winning of affecting it properly was you show up 5 minutes early, you stay 5 minutes later. And it's in those moments when you and I were watching something like that and we look to see, did they shake hands beforehand? Sure. And the moment it ends, did one walk toward the other? Yeah. I've tried to spend a whole career going down that path. I really don't need the credit. People take good care of me and my ego. It's, how much of this stuff can you give away? Then they get confidence. I guess I remember that. I have a younger brother who turned out to be a tremendous athlete. But when he was very little, I thought, I can just beat up on this little guy, or I could try to help him a little bit. And the latter seemed to make more sense. Yeah, that makes sense. I don't know if this is on point or not, but those vignettes, those moments, like you say, and then of course we just had a presidential or vice presidential debate this week, which was blissfully civil. Yes. Regardless of the content of either side, it was a really a throwback debate. But the other thing I like to watch, and I like to watch late night TV, not necessarily late at night, but I'll watch it in the morning. Mm-hmm. And I always love those moments at the desk where whoever it is, it could be back in the Johnny Carson days or nowadays Stephen Colbert, whoever it is, that moment when they're going to commercial and there's that conversation between them. It's a secret, right? Because you can't hear what they're saying. The mic's off. Maybe you can hear a little mumbling, but I'm always captivated more by what they might be saying and how they're treating each other. Does it seem genuine and authentic? Are they laughing together? Do they have a familiarity with each other? And, it's TV. There's certainly a fakeness to it all. But even with that paradigm, I'm still captivated by that moment more than the actual substance of the interview.
Yeah, the rest of it all seems a little bit scripted. I agree with that. I mean, I can tell you an example, multiples even from just this month. I'll give you one from yesterday. The presidents of two big, well-known universities, us being one of them in the city of Jacksonville, end up on a stage together in a format where the two of us are sitting next to each other, about to be introduced for 70 minutes. So for 70 minutes, you're sitting in front of 500 people, shoulder to shoulder. And we're very good friends. We joke all the time that people don't expect to see us out in the wild together. But it's a little like, when I was in New York City, I never heard Columbia mock NYU. When I was working in Boston, I never heard MIT mock Harvard. I mean, that's not what the great cities do. So I had that same feeling. Like people came up later, to your point, and said, what were you guys talking about? We had just had breakfast 2 days before. We were following up. So that sense, is that leadership? I think that the dozens and dozens of employees of the two universities who were also in the audience that day feel better about their university knowing that their boss or their leader is friends with a leader in the same industry. And that so many of the things we talk about with leadership is, how are you making them feel? Not how are they making you feel?
Right.
And you're supposed to run things or make the final decision or get paid the most, whatever that is. So your constant state of mind. That's why many of us in leadership know the name of every receptionist. We know the name of every food service worker. They're hugely important, and I think that's proper respect. People feel respect. People's BS meter on "Are you being real with me?" has never been, it seems to me, more finely tuned than it is right now.
Yeah. Although less people, we're all attuned to where we're not being filled, where people are slighting us. But I think very few people are investing in how do we feed others. And I think what you're describing and what I've seen you walk out, is in the minority for sure.
I was told when I was younger, maybe you were the same, Mike. If you're ever get into a position of any kind of power or position, or there's only ever one person you should poke fun at, you should only one ever, and that's yourself.
Yeah.
And this kind of sarcasm that gets built into, you and I have both been on a stage, handed the ball to each other. We've both had little foibles and screw ups. We've never mocked the other one ever. Right?
Not publicly. No, I think teasing each other behind the scenes is a sign of security. Yeah. But no, there's a way to do that. And that is there's exceptions to every rule, but in comedy, the rule is don't punch down. Again, the counterpoint to that is, is it a cancel culture thing, depending on where you come out on that. But I think it's a good role. George Carlin, who I got to see at JU back in my days, he performed there, said you can cut on your own gang. So, if you're a little white bald guy like I am, you can make fun of little white bald people and whatever. You can make fun of college presidents.
You are a funny stand-up comedian.
Well,
world class. I don't know anybody who did what you did at JU, then went on to Georgetown, then became a great attorney, then ran this combination of things. I've talked to other people about you, the stand-up comic part, this podcast, and running marathons. That combination of things, this would be 2 or 3 people put together. And it's there's nothing, you're not 6'6" and 270 and that. So, God bless you. Good on you. You're a hell of a role model for young people.
I appreciate it. I'm not going to let you turn this into what you do so well, and that is encouraging other people, because you do that every time I'm with you, and I appreciate it very much. I do think, and obviously there's a lot of people from the Northeast Florida area that listen to the podcast, but people all over. So to paint JU for you and your JU experience, Jacksonville University and mine, and some commonalities, at least in terms of what we got from it. I always think about it as being a bigger fish in a smaller pond, and it was plenty big enough for me at the time because, Harvard and Yale were not beating down my doors when I graduated high school, and I didn't have a scholarship for athletics because of the attributes you just described. But for whatever reason, if you wanted something done, you could do it at JU. If you wanted to do nothing and blend in, you could probably do that too. You could probably do that anywhere. But because I had goals and aspirations, although admittedly, by the time I was dropped off at JU and my parents took off, there was no logical reason to think I would accomplish any of them. I just had some ideas. But anyway, that experience for 4 years, back to your point about being seen by other people, being seen by the president of the university, who was my president, and your president, Fran Kenny, who died just a couple years ago. That just prepares you in a way, and it's not to crap on other schools or institutions or places that are bigger. But there's something about being in that type of environment when you're at least the type of person I was, and apparently you were back in the 80s, that it prepares you to ask what other people would be afraid to ask because they may seem like dumb questions, or make a suggestion to create something that others are looking for someone else to create. I don't know if any of that touches on your experience or not.
It does. And specific to that, I think you and I went to school about 10 years apart, and Dr. Fran Kinney is a legend for anybody who wants to look her up, and meant a lot to you and me and kind of changed how we saw the world. To me, a university experience, if you want to spend 2 minutes on it, there's no uniform. People who want to go to Clemson because they like a huge school and they want to have a certain kind of party on Saturday night after a big football win, or they want to go to a very small school that may not even play football, or they want to go to an HBCU, or they want to go to, that's got to fit like a glove. And the tragedy that we try to never put a student in position in is that they are sort of putting on someone else's clothes. That, my parents wanted me to go here. That tends to happen with larger schools or state schools, or not just in Florida, but all over. And we always say we're not trying to connect them to JU. We're trying to make them belong, help them belong. I mean, that idea that I don't just have a tether because I'm in the fraternity, sorority, club, team, baseball, whatever it is, but they actually want to be there. And that the idea that 8 or 9 out of 10 come back and graduate from schools like ours and the good schools says they want to be there. And of course it's their friends, but it's this sense, I believe, in the fact that a smaller, mid-size, our school, 4,200, there's schools in Florida that are 70,000. But at a school of our size, you're going to get to flex your muscles and try out what it's going to be like when you get out.
Yeah. And what I find too.
Make your own calls.
Yeah. And what I find in my experience there, not to make this an infomercial for JU, but we'd be remiss if we didn't at least talk about our experiences there. And my observations of Jacksonville University since you've been there, because you've been there 10 years as the president, and I know you won't brag on yourself, but I will. It's even less, and I've never said it this way. I was thinking about as you were speaking about how you make the students, how Jacksonville University community makes the students sort of fit in and find their place there. It's how does JU find their place with that student? Because each student, I think, is empowered, and I'm not saying they each take advantage of it, to make Jacksonville University better. Whether that's creating a club, whether it's, whatever. There's more examples than I can think of because I'm not in the academic world every day. But I think that's a real distinction. And for parents that are listening or folks that are looking for universities for themselves, I think that's something to think about when you go on those trips or you go online and visit virtually with the schools. Is not so much do you fit there, but is it the kind of institution that's going to find a way to fit around you and the unique qualities you bring? Yeah,
brilliant. Because one of the things we say to them all the time, to the incoming freshmen, I talk to the high school students when they're in, is come make us better. Yeah. Mike Freed, having gone to our school when he did, made us better. You were one of the people who gave me good thoughts on whether or not to do a law school. We did it. And a school like ours, or schools like ours, Wake Forest, Davidson, Stetson, Elon, very similar approaches that we do try to wrap around the student. One of the really fun things you'd get to do in a job like mine is incoming freshmen, first-year students come in. And there's this fine line. It's partly incredibly entertaining and it's partly difficult because it's expensive. You try to never say to a student, we don't do that here.
Right.
So if somebody comes in and says, can we have pickleball courts? That went from me saying, we don't do that here, but what's pickleball?
Right.
6 years ago, 7, 8 years ago.
Good starting point.
Yeah. Now we have pickleball courts. Can we have this club? Can we have that club? Can we have club tennis? It's not just sports, can we have a place where commuter students can convene together? And, huge breakthroughs, like a group of military students came in, veterans, and said, we tend to be a little bit older. We may have families. We're going to school here. Rather than sit in our cars in between class, is there a place? So we created a thing called the Defender's Den. And you take a blank piece of space, not much bigger than your studio here, and you give it to them. And within 6 months, it had their medals on the wall. They brought in flags. They had pictures of their family. It was very moving. Yeah. So we wrapped ourselves around their affinity group, provided some amenities, and went from that. Is exciting because then, as I always say to the 18 and 19-year-olds when they join us, help me think about what today's 15-year-olds are going to want in 3 years.
Yeah.
And they all say, geez, I don't have any idea. I said, so a 60-year-old guy should have a better idea.
Right.
Work with me on this. That's how we knew we didn't need ATMs, because they don't carry cash. Yeah. They didn't care about blue phone technology to run to an emergency because they all had a cell phone. I mean, it's in their natural flow of life, but it's exactly how you said it.
But whereas if you did what, frankly, a lot of old white guys or whatever, sort of traditional legacy person is, they would listen to what the vendors tell them they need rather than listening to the consumers. I see you do that too. And again, I know we're talking about JU, but I know these are qualities you learned and benefited from and then emulated from industry. But I've seen you do it with parents that would perhaps, as parents tend to do, express, hey, it could be a complaint, could be a observation, could be a, suggestion for improvement. And I am privileged to be on the Honors College Advisory Board now. And I know that you're the head of that now. I don't know if you'd say it this way, but she certainly came with some suggestions as a parent. And now she's running the Honors College. Right. So sometimes asking for opportunities as an employee or a student or parent is an opportunity for you to say, that's a good idea. Let's look into that. Yeah, you're right. And let me tie that string to the one you made a little earlier. People have their issues, their complaints. They see the world through their own prism, as we all do. Many times I find myself in that situation, especially if somebody's kind of getting it. And the higher you go in organizations, the more you should field more complaints, because if they were easy to handle, somebody else would have taken care of them somewhere. By the time they get to me, I find myself oftentimes saying, all right, let me kind of share with you, fair comment. You want more something, less something, too much, whatever. Let me share with you kind of what my consideration there is. And for a minute, you be me. Because you've been thinking about this, I would say it the same way. You've been thinking about this for a month. I've been thinking about it for a minute. You brought it to me. So I've got this consideration and this one and this one. We do this with students too. There was a time when they all wanted, a smoothie bar. And I said, okay, that's going to be $300,000. Would you rather have the smoothie bar or would you rather have a healthcare clinic on campus? And you can see them, that's like, not apples and apples or apples and oranges, just like fish and Tuesday. Like, how do I said, they're the same amount of money. Mm-hmm. They have different utility, but I frequently find myself saying to people, you play me, and how would you look at it? And it's not a wise ass question. Frequently, they'll bring a different perspective. That's why when someone like you would be willing to sit on our board of trustees, you say, now I've got the smartest person in the room. God, always the smartest person in the room is the room. And so if you've got 26 really smart people all trying to build a better university for families and students in the community, that's many times better than Tim Koss sitting by himself, who went to school there in the 70s, because the healthcare people from the Mayo Clinic and the attorneys like you and the people from marketing, they all see the world differently, and we come together. That to me is exciting. And I do think young people look at that and they say, how do you get from here to there? I mean, how short a line? What's the trick to get from here to there? And obviously it's a lot of bumps along the way. Yeah. And it doesn't happen automatically. You say, get smart people together. First, you got to pick them. Then you have to motivate them. Then you have to sort of smooth out rough edges and consensus build and do all those things that, a good coach like a Phil Jackson on the Bulls does when you get a bunch of great players together that I think everybody would recognize, to use that example. Might not have been a great team with a different coach, even though they were all some of the best players ever.
Right.
So, I mean, where did you learn those skills of sort of managing people and personalities in a way that, as you were saying earlier, sort of brings out the best in them, not at the expense of other people?
Yeah, my experience there was it was sort of backward in that large corporations, extremely successful places in the early part of my career were very big on performance reviews and written performance review. General Electric and IBM did things a certain way. So did Kodak and Union Carbide. And these things were very big on the handful of things you needed to improve. And as a player, as a coach of kids, as a team captain, everything about the way we were assessing people. And I started having people report to me when I was 24. So you got managerial chops early. Felt like I was spending 90% of my time essentially telling people what they were doing wrong. Right. We love you, Mike. You're an outgoing guy. You're a good lawyer. But let me talk to you about your financial analytical skills. Mm-hmm. And then I talked to you for 15 minutes about this. And I thought that was wrong. So I sort of got rid of that. Now to your question, which is people will show you their best side because that's really what they want to do. They want to do it all that. They want to do it socially. They want to do it professionally. They want to do it in relationships. And for me, if there's any little magic, it's being able to look at some people you and I both know and go, they are extremely good at that. If I could put that skill, hold the personality for a minute with that skill over there from him with her, I'm going to talk to them each about, here are my expectations. If you want to get better, if you, the charismatic marketing person, want to get better and eventually have this job someday, you got to get better at finance, but I'm not going to hold you to it in this job. If you, the finance person, want to someday be the president or the provost or whatever, you're going to have to be 100 times better in public speaking, and we can teach you. What I find is, in the main, you do better when you accentuate what they're good at than if you try to move them from a D to a C in something they're not good at. Yeah, they feel better. It's the simplest thing. And that's back to this idea of a tapestry of talent that put together. If somebody told me I was going to get to hire Mike Freed, I'd say, I know exactly the 5 kinds of talent I'd put around him.
And a nice way of saying that is I know his weak areas, right?
Yeah, but right now, do I want to bludgeon you for the next 5 years on those things? Were you going to say someday, look, I know I hated calculus. I'm making it up that it's fine. For many people, it's finance. For many people, it is. Yeah.
There are many shortcomings. You would have no shortage of opportunities to find people to support me. Again, finding the gem would be the hard challenge. I can't let you go without asking you 2 things, and I wish we had longer. I appreciate the time you've made.
Yeah, me too.
And maybe there's a relationship between the 2, maybe there's not, but 2 of the things that are at your heart and are most impressive to me are your heart of service. And when I say yours, I mean yours and your family's and your wife Stephanie's. And that gets me to her. I mean, you guys, I'm sure no marriage is perfect, but you guys, when I see you, when I observe you in those moments that we were talking about earlier, not just the ones where you're meant to be seen, but where I'm sort of watching, just how you treat each other. And when I'm with each of you individually, I hear about how you speak about each other and just in the community. People know and respect you. You build each other up. You've had a long marriage. You've raised 2 great kids. You got grands now. So I want to talk about both of those things as much as you want to share. What paths along the way led you to your heart of service? And how did you build such a wonderful marriage?
Yeah, gosh, thanks. I'll take the second one if I can. I mean, when you tell young people today that they're standing looking at my wife, who I'm blessed to say does not look in her 60s. And I say, she and I've been on this earth in 8 different decades. You can see people having trouble with that. We were both born in 1959. I think the key there, other than the fact that she's a spectacular and forgiving woman and smart as all hell and funny, is that we were very good friends in high school and we weren't dating. There was a queue to date my wife, so I had to wait till they got down to the T's for Tim. But there was, so the concept of having a similar upbringing, I don't know, similar values, similar regional stuff, and me going away to Jacksonville University while we started dating when we were in high school, and sort of learning to live as a baseball player. You didn't come home when everybody else came home. You're only home about 2 months a year for 4 years. And make accommodations. And she's incredibly honest, and she does have a heart of service. My one anecdote for you there, we were working on something together when we were dating but not yet married, and something came up, and I said, this is how I'm going to handle it. And I did have a little bit of a reputation for, being a competitive person and some driven and that sort of thing. And I can remember her saying, well, how does that square with your Christian faith? Mm. And think about that now. She probably told me that when I was 20, that's 40 something years ago. Mm-hmm. And I said, what Christian faith is Sunday morning at 11. Mm-hmm. By noon, I'm back to being, she's like, I don't think so. That simple concept about, are you going to be who you say you're going to be, or you're going to be that when it's convenient to you, was a game changer for me. And so,
and what in that moment, I know you're doing what you always do, and rightfully so, with Stephanie, talking about all the great things she did to make your marriage great. But what in that moment, what bringing you up to that moment gave you the soft enough heart to listen to what she had to say? Because that could have been the end for a lot of relationships.
The genuinely held belief that she knew me as well as I did, and this is not a joke, and was smarter than me. I mean, to this, we know people who are, we may think that about each other. There was a set of what the world today would call soft skills about this girl that was just a teenager, early 20s. We weren't married. That was completely into a whole other side of what I thought I really knew. So if I thought my thing was kind of numbers and analytics and risk taking, she was very warm and empathetic. And, people when she was 20 would say, your girlfriend is so wise. I'd say, who calls a 20-year-old wise? So
relational too. Yeah. You're both very relational.
Thank you. We all talk, Stephanie and I talk all the time, you come 75% of the way, I'll come 75% of the way. And somewhere in the middle of that, there's a 50% solution. So she's spectacular, and the kids are great. And I appreciate that. In terms of service, a couple thoughts. In my generation coming up, I didn't see, our parents were working hard, raising lots of kids. So I didn't see lots of dads or moms like serving on the Chamber of Commerce or running for the school board. Not where I grew up. I got a load of Frank Kinney when I was at an age. The fact that I can remember her becoming president between 79 and 80 when I was a ball player, and then seeing her a lot over the years. And Stephanie and I have talked many times since. So we're in our 60s. Fran lived to be 103, thank God. And we have elderly parents. And the number of times my wife and I will say to each other, got to remember Fran. Fran's unfailing optimism. There was a sweetness but firmness to her. Man, we learned a ton. And I learned a lot. I had the pleasure of working for 16 different CEOs in my corporate career. An early one told me, you're going to be one of these one day. I'm lucky I got there, and you will learn as much of what you don't want to do from us as you will from what you do want to do. And that's ended up being true. I've seen, some big egos and some rough handling, and tried to stay away from that. But I guess in the end, the idea of serving others, seeing other people flourish in a way that possibly they couldn't have in it for people in certain positions, and I may be in one. It isn't that much to have made the phone call for them. It isn't that much to go over and ask them to stand up, because you really do like the person, but they'll call you later and say, it meant the world to me that you recognize me in front of my peers. Yes, well, you're doing an excellent job. So constantly thinking about other people. My wife is sort of a heroic thank you note writer, which rubs off on a lot of people. People say, I keep notes from your wife and I use the same sentences with other people. I mean, that's just a way of seeing things. So a lot of it's some fortunate breaks, I guess.
Yeah. Again, you're being humble, but I think in demonstrating that you're giving us part of the answer. Tim, thanks for all you do. Thanks for being a friend. Thanks for being a servant leader in the truest sense, and being such a good role model for those of us that aspire to be better. I appreciate you very much.
Amen. Thanks, Mike. You're a great dad. Be good.
All right, brother. Well, there you have it. That was me talking to Tim Cost, and what a neat guy. I hope you got a sense of what he's like. He's been a very special person to me and so many people. And when I say special to me, I don't necessarily mean reciprocally, because he's just one of those charming people in the most genuine sense that really invests in people. And the investment may not even be all that significant in time, but the things that he says and the moments that he taps into, at least my life, and I've heard tell of him doing it for others, is so meaningful and something you carry with you. And I've certainly carried with me, and so appreciate that. And there's only a few people like that I know that do those types of things. I try to pay it forward, not saying I'm always good at it, but I encourage everyone to follow that example, to think about the people in your life that have poured into you, not even in the most significant quantity of time, but in the most important ways, in the most deliberate ways, without agenda, without a purpose other than just to be kind or loving, or to see you. Maybe that's something that came out of the conversation with Tim today. To be seen is something that we all seek out, and we don't need to be seen by everybody. That's sort of the voyeuristic, show me Instagram way that really diminishes it, because you're being seen in a lowercase way, but nobody really knows you, and frankly, you can lose yourself after a little while. But the genuine relationships, the genuine people that say, I see you, I know who you are, I know what you're up to. It doesn't even have to be an observation of something good. It could be, I see you're suffering. I see you're in grief. I see something extraordinary that you did. And Tim Cost does that as well as anybody. So that's leadership, in my opinion. And we learned a lot today from the conversation with Tim. But that's certainly the biggest takeaway I have, is just to be seen, the desire to be seen. He obviously grew up in a family where he was seen. He played sports in a way that he was seen because of his ability and his ability to lead and inspire and bring out the best in others. And then he brought that into all these spaces in corporate America, and ultimately to the great benefit of Jacksonville University. So check out whatever Tim Cost is doing next, because it's going to be something extraordinary. I hope you enjoyed this episode of the My First Rodeo podcast. I hope you'll share it with others. I hope you'll listen to other episodes if you've missed any, and share them, subscribe, and you'll come back and join us next time on the My First Rodeo podcast. My First Rodeo.